and David, and we are very happy that you guys are still coming and joining, and that we can have these sessions. I think they're very important. Today we have Hoffmann with us, who I know from working with him in Danish politics. He's a very visionary and innovative person. He is the Deputy Director General at the Danish Business Authority. He holds a PhD in economics, and his current job, he is responsible for both developing and implementing a lot of business development policies in both at a national and a regional level. This year in January, the Danish Business Authority won the Circulars Award for the city's region. Anders was also with us in Davos, where he received the prize, and they wanted, of course, what he's going to present for us today. And he has also been playing an active role in this policy toolkit that we have developed for as a pilot together with Ellen MacArthur Foundation. He has been working as a senior economist at OECD and in the Danish Ministry of Trade and Industry, and has also written a lot of articles. So it's a skilled person you have in front of you today, and I'm very happy to hand over to you, Anders.
And it really is a great pleasure to be allowed to present our work for such an important crowd. But again, I mean, thank you for the award. It was a lot of fun, but also a very great honor. We were sitting there, sort of waiting to see if we won, and Michael sort of got the award just before us. And I think we just realized that this is something really working, and it's still nice in our office. Turn to the presentation. The first slide I have is simply to show that Denmark is so small that we can actually participate in just make sure that I actually know how to change this slide. Just a second. Because it's not working when I'm pressing the next button. Denmark is a small country, about 5 million people, very low unemployment, sort of very well on most accounts. If you sort of turn to that, we have many very leading companies in the world in that respect. I'll get back to that later. I think we have had a very, very long political commitment to energy efficiency and renewable energy, and the price was sort of that we have actually done a lot of work for a long time. Significant finding for us, or the most sort of surprising, was that we realized that even though we were a front runner in many aspects, there was still significant potential. For instance, in remanufacturing, in our households, in biorefineries, and abroad in the Danish sector, there was a lot to be gained from working more with resource efficiency and circular economy. This is just a few of the companies in Denmark that have clearly been sort of in the forefront of the circular economy. Just a few of them. I mean, most would know Carlsberg. I think really keen on this agenda there. The chairman of the board, also at Davos, is really one of the persons leading this from the business side in Denmark. Have done tremendous work on circular economy. I think the achievement that they're trying to work on a bottle to put their beer into, really unclear, really on the forefront. A small company which was part of our promotion video is the Vega. That really is a business model, how to take all the clothes we buy for our children to make that much more sort of sustainable and recyclable, that you actually just send it back to them and get something new, and they will send it to another child. And then we ask for the complete turnover and have a very much more greener profile in the last 5 years. I want to mention is Lego, who's really now stepping up in this game. Just sort of announced quite recently that they're going to spend sort of $1 billion on trying to figure out how to make plastic bricks without actually using plastic. So it's something that has a very high on the agenda among the large companies in Denmark. Unfortunately, I think this really high focus on it hasn't really trickled down to our small companies. So this is something that we've been looking into. So we are a business authority. We are part of the Danish business and growth. We're basically working on anything to do with business promotion, the regulation, digital solution. But the key thing for us is to work with competitiveness and make it active to run businesses in Denmark. And I think that was actually how we sort of ended up in this discussion about the circular economy, because we were really been struggling in Denmark for the last 10 years with productivity. I mean, the productivity increases in Denmark has been much slower than in many other OECD countries, and we've been looking at labor productivity and capital productivity for many years, and really trying to understand what was going on, why wasn't the Danish economy sort of growing the way we thought it should be doing. And as that, we also looked at resource efficiency. Next slide, we sort of tried and did some very simple calculation and just saying, okay, labor productivity. But if you look at sort of in manufacturing, you have the material input as a much more important factor for productivity. It's a higher cost in manufacturing. So why don't we have a look at that? And it actually turned out that resource efficiency in the Danish companies was actually not that high. I mean, there are many years uses index we show energy efficiency, and the energy efficiency in Danish industry is one of the world. So there's always been this perception in Denmark that we're extremely good at using our inputs. It actually turned out that if you look at then electricity, well, it wasn't actually that great. Germany, Sweden, for instance, to take some of our neighbors, was much more efficient. Simple calculation and saying, okay, what if we move to an efficiency level that was close to Germany? And then that we can spare something around 2.5 euro per hour. Increase our wages by 2.5 euro per hour and still have the same competitiveness if we have the same resource efficiency. Really where it will allow our attention and saying, okay, this is a huge number. There's clearly something here that we're missing. We started to investigate and say, okay, what are we missing? And I think that was how we sort of tumble more or less directly into the circular economy and say, talk to large companies about these things. They clearly said, well, I mean, look a bit on the inside. There's a lot of things that you can do for the economy, and so we did. And on the next slide, I think that one of the first things we did was that we have our Fund for Green Business Development, and then we really tried to do three things. First of all, we work with normal business and try to see if there's any way to get them to improve efficiency and move to more business model-based circular economy. We do that by simply trying to work with entrepreneurs. Of course, sometimes it's easier for an entrepreneur to come in with a new business model than for a small company to change its business model completely, because they have less to lose in some respect. So I think quite early on we saw that entrepreneurship was one of the key questions that we need to answer if we wanted to move to a more circular economy. And we had this very long list of all the stuff that we've been doing. And there's two dots. I will return to them in details later. So the third dot, we early on said that we could of any changes by ourselves. We need much more partnership. All of these partnerships where we try to see is there any way we can look at construction waste. Look at that. Of course, you need some constructions, and you need somebody who actually tear down the building, somebody who reuse buildings. So we are trying to do these partnerships across the various businesses in order to make them work together in a new way. We also did some for the bioeconomy, trying to get some of the to work with hospitals in different ways to try to break these new partnerships. industrial symbiosis, which, to be honest, I was personally quite skeptical at from the outset, because the big idea was to sort of do a dating site, so saying that, well, I mean, I had this great plastic, do anybody need that? And really wasn't thinking would work. But actually now it's been a quite important project, and we had a lot of businesses that actually had a lot of waste, and had sort of a chimney with a lot of heat just going up in there, and they had this factory lying just next to them that actually was buying heat at a price, and they never thought about sort of sharing that. So it was actually quite surprising that even in a very efficient country like Denmark, there was actually quite a lot of very local industrial symbiosis that could be sort of with this program. Simply an engineer would visit the plant, talk to them, and then try to see if they could do a match others. We early on thought that sort of the key aspect of this, I mean, this is very typical of us when we sort of approach a new thing. We are really sort of business model, market type of persons. So we're accelerating programs for a new green business model, where we wanted companies to sort of figure out a new way to make money based on business model. And we were to work with 30 companies, and then work with 20, and then work with 10. Sort of every time we moved for companies, we would spend more resources and have more sort of working effectively with that company. And as I mentioned, with the children was one of these companies. To do this for innovation, where we tried, it was more like a sort of if Denmark wanted to move forward, we wanted to sort of use regulation or public procurement to circular economy. What could we do? To be honest, that was actually slightly less successful than some of our other things. It was really hard to grip on that. We have done, I don't know how many very interesting analysis trying to dig down to the data, and we'll have this policy tool, which I will get back to a bit later on. I've sort of tried to sort of highlight the results for our green funds. 300 projects have applied, given money to about 100, and about 50 of them that have been granted or have completed the work. We have preliminary data on what the results are of these programs. So if 1 million euro grant, we'll get about 120 jobs. We'll have about 6 million euros in turnover, again also after 5 years. These numbers are based on what firms think they will get. We know from other programs that about 2/3 and 3/4 of these results would not be realized. So will fail, some of them are too optimistic, but still you would have jobs per million euro based on this, even though that some of them are too optimistic. So it's actually quite sort of based on this. I think we've been working on the next slide with trying to look at the regulation. I think we quite quickly realized that a lot of business models are meeting the way that we have regulated our economy, because they're innovative and they're using stuff in a completely different way that nobody thought about actually did these regulations, which is our sort of pride of that is rematch. It's a very simple big idea the company have. You have all of these nice football that are now made of plastic, which is getting more and more common. And nobody have actually thought about what to do with that plastic. So you would just sort of, when you play more or you need a new one, you just or using something quite good for that. And the idea was that why not reuse that and make a new football plane? And in scaling that, they actually needed to do that across Europe. But then you sort of hit so many barriers that it's possible to do that, because what you're doing is that you actually take waste, what the old football plane would be, that would be waste, sort of by term, but from reach, that is an input for making a new field. So all of these regulations, which you can see sort of at the bottom, that you hit in order to do this bit, have this vision model. And even everybody agreed that this is a great business model. Our Minister of Environment said, well, this is really great. We had a lot of reviews, so everybody liked it. But actually, it was just too complicated to actually in the first place. I think we solved most of them. We're still struggling a bit with export-import parts of some of they want to do, but otherwise it's not almost possible for them to do business. He agrees that this is a model and this is what we should do. It just hits so many other aspects in our legislation that is too complicated. So some of those are that they hit these. Another problem, which is on the next slide, is GoMore. It's a company, and then it's sort of a sharing company where you share your car. I think what the problem for them is that it's really not that they're hitting a lot of regulation. It's just extremely difficult for the sharing companies to get a clear answer from the legislation. I mean, how much time can you borrow your private car out without being seen as somebody who do this for a living or for business purposes? So what's the limitation? Is it 6 months? Is it 9 months? Is it based on how much you make? Those are extremely important if you will a company within sharing company or in the sharing economy, but very hard for us as regulators because we will all say, well, I mean, that would depend on so many different things. We have, for instance, the crowding platforms. They were allowed to know what time they had to pay the VAT because that was also very unclear because when we did all the VAT legislation, nobody was thinking about crowdfunding. So all of these things where businesses really want to have an answer, can I do this, yes or no? And from our side, it's just very difficult to do these answers. So I think that's one of the key recommendations that we have found in our work so far. If you want to sort of stimulate the economy, but also the circular economy, which as a subset, then making sure that businesses can get a clear answer. It doesn't say yes or no. It's fast and clear. Because a lot of these entrepreneurs that are doing these companies, they're dynamic. That 9 it's a no. 10 other ideas they can work on just as fast as they get it fast. So they are clear from the case. Luckily, they actually finally got the answer, and I think now they're sort of running a quite nice business with the peer car lending in Denmark. Just the next slide. I think this is just summing up some of the things I've already said, that we have this task where we really try to look at various unintended barriers in our legislation that sort of prohibit new business models and more efficient use of resources. And we have to look at that we have a lot of interviews, sort of a lot of trying to understand the various business models. The problem with these things are you just can't answer this direct because of these things don't because they think they are legal. So there's a lot of sort of search and interviews in that. So I think that's been quite effective. Then on to the toolkit. Sort of a brief overview of that. That's the one page. And so the to that on the next slide. I think we really wanted to do, we were part of this El MacArthur patient, and we were to them, and we had the idea that it could be really nice to see, I mean, what was actually the benefit for you to move to our circular economy. How much are we talking about in GDP terms? So quite a corporation where we had the other sort of as a main driver. We also had quite a lot of resources tied to this project, and we were also so lucky that the Minister of Environment also thought that this was a really interesting project. We were sort of working together with them, and then McKinsey and NERA sort of did a lot of the consulting work in this part. I think we have these 4 groups. So the Danish stakeholders, where chairing that, trying to understand, I mean, how do they view this change towards the circular economy? We had with individual businesses trying to understand the business model, sort of evaluate the potential of doing that slightly different or doing that in a more way. We have all the ministries, so we had a lot of high-level meetings with the ministries trying to get some sense of was this completely not on the Danish political side, or how to fly, or how many other conflicts. If we had this idea, would that be a conflict towards change? And of course, we had this international both academic and policymakers from around the world. And then to what I actually did. First of all, I think the key thing was to dig down to some sectors. So on the next slide, we sort of map out what sectors we're looking at, and we did it in a quite simple way. We just say, I mean, in order to impact, it needs to be a huge role in our economy and to have sort of a huge circular potential. Of course, the potential was more sort of based on that by whereas the role in the national economy, of course, was based on real data. And then we sort of picked 4 main sectors and one sort of cross-cutting. It was construction, food and beverage, machinery, and hospitals. We had packaging, which was sort of a sector across. So those were the sectors that we did a deep dive into each of these. And on the next slide, we tried to sort of calculate based on a very nice computer model. I mean, the benefit for the Danish economy. If you look at sort of the GDP, somewhere between 0.8 and 1.5% of versus baseline to move to a more circular economy. A lot of discussion about whether there actually was a job impact because of the share economy parts, for instance, would actually not increase the number of jobs. It might decrease the number of jobs. So there was a lot of discussion, and also, of course, can you create jobs in the long run? So the numbers here are on that will have an increased value, and that will increase wages, and that will increase people's, and that will increase the labor supply. So this is an increase in labor supply. It also had a very nice impact on resources. So you impact on CO2, and of course you had, for some reasons, you had a huge reduction of those, for instance, iron, steel, and plastic. So there's quite a lot of sort of economic potential for the Danish economy. Then sort of more detail on what we're actually looking at. So this is a detailed breakdown. So for each sector, for instance, for food and beverage, we were looking at 2 specific opportunities. I mean, we started with, I don't know how many opportunities for each of the sectors, and then broke them down to some of the most important parts. And there were 2 parts that we took from food and beverage. You can see there was quite a lot of money to capture cascading biorefineries. Of course, you needed a huge means from the outset, but also in the long run, returns could actually be quite big. The biggest impact was number 3, where you industrialized production and 3D printing of buildings. This is also some of the things that we've been discussing most after the study, and how can you actually try to realize some of the huge gains in construction. If we, for instance, machinery, there was the remanufacturing case. In Hoffmann, we had the performance model. So that for each of these sectors, we really tried to get some value estimate micro data. So these data here are based on discussion with industry experts, and then trying to sort of aggregate up to the society. So the next slide, then. It's nice to have opportunities, but in order to realize those, of course, there are areas. We had discussion about whether these benefits were benefits or growth benefits. I mean, what would be the entire initial cost in order to realize those? And we looked at these various different barriers. If we take the first slide, you could have, for each, let's take number 6, which were the remanufacturing. And you can move down and see what are the main factors that are actually sort of them. And things that we realized in, for instance, manufacturing. A factor there was that there's clearly a market failure in the transaction costs relating to finding suppliers. Because for many, many years, all of these businesses have really their value supply chain move in one direction. Clearly, that into a perfect supply chain and sort of deliver the goods in a perfect way. And now we needed to have the goods back and forth. A market figure in what would be transaction cost and the going cost of getting the new suppliers and getting all the stuff back to be able to remanufacture that. That was something that should be addressed. If we look at one of the other barriers, for instance, in the number 9, Number 9 is performance models in healthcare. They're clear that not any use of these performance models in Denmark, where instead of buying the equipment, we actually sort of lead on sort of performance measure that it needed to take any pictures of broken hips. Benefits both from the sort of resource efficiency side, but also from the cost side, were quite huge. And with barriers, one of the places where there was few barriers, there's no legal barriers, there's no sort of but huge barriers within hospitals. I mean, the ability within each of the hospitals to actually procure these types of contracts just exist. This is also something where we've been trying to look what can you actually do about that. We've been working with some of the Danish hospitals to see, because there's really will to be working on that, but also that understanding that this is a complicated issue, and we might want to sort of mix several of the hospitals together, to have these performance models built in the right way. So you see that we try to sort of look at each of these phases where you have the economic, the market phases, the regulatory phases, and the social factors. And depending on which industries you see, the phases were sort of different. Sort of a public policy perspective, I think we were, of course, mostly focused on actually do on the regulatory side. Some of the market phases, of course, we can help some of these, but a lot of them would be actually quite difficult, of course, to change. Also, some of the things were just not developed because the technology was not ready. That was, for instance, the case for number 1 with biorefinery, and we are still sort of technology that are quite far from breaking even at the level of technology. Same thing with 3D. Everybody loved 3D printing, but it's still not sort of a technology where you can just press a button and you actually get a house which is cost effective to that. So that's some of the examples. And finally, the technology. For instance, Carlsberg are still trying to figure out how to make their bottles sort of more. So this is clearly also a place where there should be new technologies. So this is sort of a brief overview of all the barriers. I mean, I think this slide took, I don't know how many to actually to do and also to understand, but it's a very nice way to sort of see, I mean, if we want to move forward, where we would have to do something in order to do that. On the next slide, we try to sort of summarize, I mean, what are the key lessons that we have learned in Denmark, also what are the key lessons we've learned reading the story together with the mechanization. I think my biased because we're business authority. I mean, the business are really key to make this transition. I mean, not a business model that will make money for you, then it's very, very difficult for likely to actually adopt that model. So you need to have a business that sort of transition in doing that. And we have an important role as a public sector, of course, to address the non-financial barriers, which is performing some of the things. For instance, if hospitals don't have the capability to actually demand these spaces, this is something where we can have training programs. If you don't have the clearance that from the circular business model, then you can have various support programs and these teams, like accelerating programs that you can do from the policy perspective. I think we realize that if we look at sort of the policies that have been used in Denmark, then it's difficult sort of to narrow it down and say, okay, this policy was or is voted for a change. I mean, it's clearly something where you need to have a lot of policies. And I think that it's almost like being sort of a cluster of policy, and then it afterwards be difficult to sort of come out one by one and sort of say, okay, what did this do and what did that do? But sort of linked between these various policies. Or what we said, the involvement of business and other stakeholders seems to be quite crucial. And also this point that the EU are for us in Denmark and all the other EU countries a player in a lot of the barriers that we found in legislation towards use of the EU legislation. So we need to have this very sort of good discussion with our friends in the Commission of how to make these regulations more to new about business model and the circular economy. We've been quite active in trying to get up with some good sponsors to work in the EU Commission on the circular economy and trying to see how we can help them to move forward on what we have learned in Denmark. This is clearly a point that we need to look afterwards. More to talk about the role of policymakers. I think it's quite important that we sort of distinguish between roles. I mean, there's a role that everybody, quite basically, I think, regardless of political party that you might sort of elaborate on that, is that this whole idea that you can level the playing field in order to make resource efficiency choice and make a better way to make them to make money by sort of correcting some of the small market, something that we'll be doing of the party that would be in charge. Something that just makes good sense that you sort of legislation, you make sure that you're not hampering any businesses based on that. So the playing field policy issue where you just make things slightly clever in a better way. And then of course there's another way. You can also choose to sort of stimulate the market actively, sort of setting very ambitious goals, showing the way, and say, okay, this is the way that we want to move forward by. So we don't want to have any waste, but we don't want to only use the renewable source, or that all stuff we buy in the public sector should be based on small. So a lot of sort of active way to stimulate the market. And is of course we want to use that option or not is more a political choice. I mean, there's ways that you can sort of make them more clear or not, but there's a distinction between the two, and we'll try to do that in the work we did to try and say, okay, there's these two types of policy, and where you are at, you can sort of choose from both baskets. This was basically a way through my presentation, and then the final slide is a picture of a very nice, with of course the trophy in the forefront. Ida, the floor back to you, and then of course I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
And I think I will pass it directly on to Quentin, who might have some questions coming in. Is that right?
Yeah, so had quite a few questions coming through. The first is quite an interesting perspective and something that we've seen through the conversations that we've been having on the circular economy from a perspective. We see a lot of large organizations beginning to make the transition towards the circular economy. And we also see a lot of small innovative companies springing up to take advantage of some opportunities that the circular economy presents. But the section, the small to medium-sized enterprise, doesn't seem to be as active, doesn't seem to be as adopting the circular economy as readily. I wondered if you had any thoughts, any perspective on that.
Sure. I think actually it almost doesn't matter what area that we're looking at. For instance, we're also just doing a lot of analysis about sort of using advanced digital and robots and robotic technologies, and you see the same thing there. I mean, large company clearly moving forward, doing really cool work, big data stuff. You see a lot of really young companies, very dynamic, doing the same thing. And then you, of course, have sort of a large proportion of lacking the skills to do that. I think it's quite typical because what you see if you're an SME, I mean, most of these would be where the company would typically also be the CEO, and his day is just so full of the company is running. So if to do a move towards the circular economy, it would be him or her that need to sit up Sunday night in order to understand, okay, what are all these new business models? What I have do. So I think that there's so much depending on the owner of the company makes it very hard for them to do decision either to circular economy or digital economy. So it's a sort of thing that we will see in many other aspects. There's a lack of resources on their side.
And kind of thinking further on about the role of government organisations to kind of stimulate that change, bear in mind that SMEs are 80% of the economy in many European countries. What help can be done to SMEs to encourage that shift? What's Denmark doing already?
There's basically two things that are quite important to do. I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship, a big fan of young new companies coming in, and I think having an economy actually stimulates that. Also very important for the SMEs. For two reasons. First of all, if they're not moving and they really don't want to change, then it's actually quite nice that some more dynamic company comes in and actually have a higher productivity and take over and create another more productive company. So to stimulate entrepreneurship, to have this pressure on SMEs is very nice. And also, of course, in Denmark we do have quite sort of an elaborated support system, so that if you're an SME and you actually want to do something and you're able to do that, but you just lack the resources, there's quite a lot of ways to actually get active support to that forward, to actually, it's sort of a public place where you actually go, get some basic ideas, and then perhaps you get a subsidized to buy a consultant to implement that. So have this combination of the pressure from dynamic entrepreneurs, and then of course the ones that actually do want to change, give a place where they can actually get an advice how to move forward.
That's good. Okay, so a lot of questions coming in here, so just trying to filter them out. An interesting one that's come through. Leaders such as Walter Starhol advocate a shift from taxation on resources to taxation on labour to encourage more efficient use of resources. What's your thinking on that? What's the position in Denmark?
Want to tax? It's a very hard political question. I think most economists would tend to want to sort of tax something that couldn't move, like houses, and every politician tried to say that in the Danish debate. That sort of would disagree with them. So I think it's extremely political whether what you want to tax. But of course, if you tax something, then that would sort of lower the use of that. That's just basic facts. I don't know if that was an answer, actually.
No, that's fine. I think that political dimension is very important. That there's, from a circular economy point of view, and what is politically palatable may well be in opposition. And I think that's, a very good example of that.
That was one of the big discussions we had when we did sort of the policy part of this report. Because at some point, our friends at MacArthur wanted to have something about political feasible. Something actually, is this political feasible or not? I think I'm actually arguing quite a lot against that, because it depends. It depends on the political environment of the country. Because we're trying here to present, these are the options, and some of the options will have a political component to them. But we try to present it as sort of neutral as possible, and then you can sort of do it based on a bigger agenda.
Agree. I think the statistic you opened at the beginning of your presentation was particularly interesting, demonstrating that the growth opportunities of the circular economy could translate into real wage increases for the Danish workforce. If that's not a political carrot, then I don't know what is. So that's very, very interesting. Moving on to one of the others that have come through. Quite a lot of interest and a number of questions actually around how you to win traction, and I guess it's coming back to that political question again, to move from a good idea to move from a national strategy then into policy, but then real tangible actions and really engage companies and individuals. So I describe some of the challenges you've had and some of the ways that you've been able to win hearts and minds, because I think it would be quite interesting for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ida would be a better to answer some of these questions, but I'll try to do it from my perspective. What as I said, I mean, we're in just sort of a bureaucratic organization trying to advise our politician as best as possible. So we really was it was not started by just looking at productivity and seeing, I mean, what is actually in there. And I think what struck us was that the impact of changing resource efficiency was so big, something that we needed to look into. Regardless of what policy climate had been, I think this was clearly something where we saw that this is very coherent with what we're doing in the Danish Business Authority to make it more competitive. So we have strong.
I can jump in at this point.
Yeah, great.
To be fair, this was something that we were as ministers discussing under our whole. We do a report on competitiveness. Not been, as far as I understand, you would not have looked into this unless I've been extremely insisting on this being part of this whole project. I mean, it wasn't something that you came up with, that resource efficiency would be important productivity or competitiveness. It was really something that I had to push personally not even my civil servants, my administration were thinking it was possible to get in. So I remember like 4 or 5 meetings where I had to keep pushing this to say what this looked into. Can you add from your side?
Yeah. Side? I think we're playing around with some numbers, but it was clear that the political focus was really based on top political agenda. Okay, we want to have this transition to more green economy. What can you do with numbers? And then involved, and we have sort of another perspective that's the people that have been involved in this, and that's why we started to work with productivity and business models and markets that was not working well. So it's another perspective on clear which political side of doing something. I think that is how we saw.
Interesting. So, the combination of kind of political determination plus the research and effort to kind of back up that political position to build a consensus. I think that's an important model.
And also, I think extremely benefit we had to working together with the Ministry of Environment. This is something that when we do this right in Denmark, it is actually quite powerful that you have ministers that work together on building such an agenda as this. So when we do that, I think that's a key thing also for other countries. They actually need to have perspective on the circular economy in order to move forward. Because to us, then it tends to be slightly one-sided. And if it's just environment, then you tend to forget some markets and business models. So you have this combination.
Mm-hmm. That's, a combination that perhaps isn't being seen across Europe by any means. And so, feeding into one of the other questions that's come through, how do you see in Denmark beyond your own national borders in terms of thought leadership, in terms of spreading your learnings throughout Europe, throughout the world to affect a broader systems change globally?
That was one of the big questions on the Friday afternoon. I think first of all, we're going to work, as I said, with the Commission, really try to our feedback on their circular agenda. And then we've been working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation doing this study. But besides that, I think that's really where we are, where our sources sort of ends. That would probably be our contribution to the bigger world on this issue.
Okay. Stuff. And I've got a couple of questions that have come through from Wolfgang. You mentioned leveling the playing field as an important policy objective. And how does that relate into subsidies? Certainly, we're aware that fossil fuels still receive subsidies. In terms of kind of moving away from that and being able to subsidize circular supplies, circular raw materials, what do you see on the horizon in that regard?
Good question. When I was using the term leveling playing field, I think actually I was sort of more thinking about sort of reducing some of the other subsidies to have sort of a more fair competition between the various resources. So again, that would be sort of more the perspective from an economist to make sure that you don't have sort of subsidies to all types and all users and stop new technologies from kicking in. So we've been looking at, why are these new business models not sort of surfacing? If it's some of them that actually seem to be more effective and better than the current one, what are actually holding them back? And then there's subsidies to production, the sort of strange regulation where you're not allowed to have new plants or you're not allowed to build. There's some regulation that actually stops these new business models and new types of firm coming in. And that was what we were looking at.
Good enough. And then just to kind of change this perspective a little bit, I guess, and then wrapping up, in does the future hold? You've described some very strong initiatives that have encouraged entrepreneurship, Mark, and really strengthened the whole position around the circular economy. And some barriers to realizing the full value potential. Where do you think it's going next? What are your plans for the next 10, 20 years? And where do you think this is going to take us?
Just to actually be quite honest, I think it's an extremely difficult question for me to answer quite now, because we had a change in government just before the summer break, and we still understand what is actually the government's take on some of the issues. Some of the things that we know that we'll keep working on. We have some that actually helps firms to be sort of help with their business model. Some of them will continue working on them. From stuff we have read about our new government and what I hear from our ministry, all this idea about sort of making it easier for new business models to come into the market. This is clearly something that we will be focused on in the future. But other aspects is still clearly formalized for us, so I can sort of come up with the answer and saying, okay, this is the direction we'll be running. But we will, of course, still be working on getting them more advice on that, and we're working on the regulation side. But aside from that, we just haven't had a discussion about the mandate for the future work here.
Okay, great. Well, before I hand back to Ida to vote of thanks, I'd like to add my own kind of personal thanks there. Firstly, for participating in the talk and devoting your time this afternoon to this audience of YGLs and the former entrants and participants in the Circular Economy Award, and also, of course, for the fantastic work that you're doing that led to you walking away with the winning prize in last year's Circulars. A real fan of what you're doing, and I think it's amazing work. So thank you very much, Anders.
Yeah, well, I really want to also thank us for being so and informative, and also you had the courage to interpret some of the political situation, but also in a very, I think, on a way that that any minister could listen to and agree to. So you were also being a good civil servant. So I can just from my side add that I've spoken to the Danish Minister for Business. He's very interested in circular economy and has no plans to take programs out. But you never know what the Ministry of Finance in Denmark makes up or what the other side. Just to be very honest with all of you. So I hope that it will continue despite we've had a new change of systems in Denmark, but we will have to see. So I want to thank Anders. I want to thank you for some great questions, and thank you, Quentin, also for
very welcome, and thank you for hosting us. And that concludes today's session. The next session will be at the beginning of October with the Sustainability Director of Ecolab, one of the sponsors for the Circus 2016. So hope to see you next time. And with that, I'll wrap the session up and say thank you very much to you all for attending, and a very good weekend.